Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. My name is Kayla Porter. I am the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium Project Manager at the Schatz Energy Research Center. I am pleased to introduce today's webinar titled Offshore Wind Jobs Preparing Northern California Tribes and Communities. Before we dive in, I first want to let you know that this presentation is a production of the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium, also known as POWC. POWC is a university-led partnership between the Schatz Energy Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt, the Center for Coastal Marine Sciences at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and the Pacific Marine Energy Center at Oregon State University. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available online next week on the Schatz Center YouTube channel. We will also be posting the video to the schatzcenter.org/wind website in the next week. You can see the links to those sites in the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, please post to the chat box and we will try to help you resolve the problem. Today's presentation will be followed by a Q&A discussion. If you'd like to ask a question, please utilize that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any time. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tanner Etherton, Economic Analyst at the Schatz Energy Research Center, who will be moderating and presenting as part of today's webinar. Off to you, Tanner.
Thanks, Kayla. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Tanner Etherton. I am an economic analyst at the Schatz Energy Research Center and an offshore wind extension specialist with California Sea Grant. So my work focuses on researching and communicating the social and economic implications of floating offshore wind development on the North Coast, with the aim of helping local tribes and coastal communities access the knowledge and tools they need to navigate the space, and also to advocate for their own priorities and benefits as this sector emerges. So one of the major economic implications of offshore wind development, and seen primarily as a benefit, is of course jobs. So today's webinar will focus on just that, with a high-level overview of some of the workforce development efforts happening here in Humboldt to help prepare this region for future jobs and training opportunities associated with the offshore wind sector. So we've structured today's session into two parts, research and analysis that looks at projected workforce needs for floating offshore wind, both locally and statewide. We'll also be talking about implementation of workforce programs to support those workforce needs, specifically two local programs that are working to expand opportunities in the trades, and particularly for communities that have historically been underserved. Our hope is that you leave today with practical insights, lessons learned, and examples you can take back to your own communities and organizations so that we can all be in a better position to help prepare offshore wind host communities to participate and benefit from this industry. I am joined today by three wonderful guest speakers who have spent a long time participating in this topic and are actively engaged in supporting workforce development for offshore wind development on the North Coast. I'll start with Andie Logan. Andie Logan is the head of industry development and leads the U.S. Renewables Advisory Team at global energy consultancy Xodus. His work focuses on providing government, industry, and regional communities with advice to take positive actions for socioeconomic growth in the offshore wind sector. He has recently been supporting, thanks, Logan. He has recently been supporting the County of Humboldt's offshore wind workforce assessment to help the region better understand potential impacts and opportunities for workforce growth, and we'll be talking about that more today. Thanks, Andie. We're also joined today by Dr. Andie Jane Ricks. Andie Jane brings over 30 years of experience in public service with career spanning workforce and economic development, education, and human services. For the past 3 years, she has served as a workforce and economic development specialist at Cal Poly Humboldt, where she teaches soft skills for the Humboldt Apprenticeship Readiness Program, as well as Offshore Wind 101, which she will be speaking more about today. Andie holds a PhD in multidisciplinary human services, a master's in public administration, and certification in offshore wind energy. Her work is guided by a deep commitment to collaboration, compassion, and the belief that sustainable community growth begins with empowering people and fostering opportunity. And lastly, and absolutely not least, Heidi Moore-Guynup. Heidi has spent the past 30 years experience employing transformational leadership practices in support of youth, families, schools, tribes, organizations, and communities through her work as tribal administrator, school superintendent, school administrator, university lecturer, psychologist, traumacologist, and more. In her current role at Blue Lake Rancheria as Director of Tribal and Government Affairs, she leads efforts associated with the offshore wind industry, tribal consultation, and government agencies, workforce development and training, community benefit agreements, and more. Thank you all so much for being here and for the work you're doing. So with that, I will go ahead and jump into our first presentation. Okay, so today I will be talking about a report that we at the Schatz Center published earlier this year, which assesses the demand for professional labor across the floating offshore wind industry in California. By professional labor, in this context and for this report, we're referring to careers or roles that would typically require a university degree or higher. But before we get into that assessment, I want to quickly go over how we at the Schatz Center think about the offshore wind sector, which is typically across four major infrastructure buckets. First, you have the offshore wind farm itself, which includes the turbines, the floating substation, and the necessary offshore infrastructure within the wind energy area. You also have your necessary port infrastructure, specifically talking about staging and integration ports, as well as any operation and maintenance facilities. Third, you have your onshore electric transmission that is going to be needed to bring that energy from the wind energy area to the major load centers across the state and into the larger grid. And lastly, you have the component supply chain or the manufacturing facilities producing finished components for the wind energy area or the wind project. Across these infrastructure buckets, you're going to have different developers, operators, permitting processes, and regulatory frameworks. And importantly for this conversation, different workforce needs. So the objective of this report was to assess that professional labor demand across the system. We did this by first evaluating existing workforce analyses and models, and then using this to determine the demand for professional labor in what we defined as the floating offshore wind industry. Specifically, this is going to include the development, construction, and operations and maintenance of the offshore wind farm itself, as well as any activities at offshore wind port facilities or across the supply chain that would be necessary to support those projects. We also assessed the professional labor demand associated with the development and construction of necessary port infrastructure and transmission infrastructure for these projects. And lastly, we looked at identifying educational pathways into these professional careers through institutions of higher education, specifically at Cal Poly Humboldt. So we started with that literature review and evaluation of existing analyses, specifically looking at studies identified in the state's AB 525 Offshore Wind Strategic Plan. As you can see here, there's a lot of variation across those projections. So you're looking at roughly a 6,000 job difference between your lowest estimate and your highest estimate. And what we found to be the primary driver of these differences was project scale and timeline, with all of these studies cited here predating California's current floating offshore wind targets. And additionally, each of these studies assumes a different level and type of in-state supply chain participation, with varying levels of transparency around those assumptions. So while these studies were very useful for a number of insights, the variation in job numbers across these activities made them unreliable for our purposes. So for these reasons, we instead used AB 525's Workforce Readiness Plan, which was actually produced by Xodus. And this plan assumes a project scale and timeline that does align with California's current goals, though it's worth noting these projections are based on higher estimates of level of in-state supply chain participation. So because of some of these discrepancies, we wanted to better understand this relationship and communicate how job estimates were being influenced by some of these assumptions. So to do so, we conducted a sensitivity analysis using NREL's Job and Economic Development Impact Model, or JEDI model. These models estimate the economic output of energy infrastructure projects like offshore wind based on a number of inputs. And so this is what's known as input-output modeling. For this analysis, we modeled a 1.5 gigawatt floating offshore wind farm in the Humboldt wind energy area. This gave us a number of outputs, including jobs, which are expressed as full-time equivalents, or FTEs, which you can think as a full-time job for 1 year or 2,080 hours. So the total cost of the project is then distributed across dozens of expenditures, which we categorize into 4 offshore wind activity areas, and each of these expenditures results in jobs. So what we were able to do was adjust what's known as the local content share for each expenditure. So that's the portion of an expenditure that's going to occur in your geographic area of focus. And by doing so, we were able to isolate these different expenditures and measure where jobs will be most concentrated, um, where they will be most likely located, and to learn more about how these assumptions around participation in these different activities can influence job estimates. What we found was that component supply chain, not surprisingly, accounts for the majority of these jobs, and could account for an estimated 60% of total jobs. And while a portion of these jobs are associated with manufacturing of finished components like your blades, nacelles, towers, mooring lines, and other components, around 76% of these jobs are associated with what we call material costs, or what NREL calls material costs. And these material costs would be what you would associate with tier 2 through tier 4 supply chain activities. So this is the manufacturing of subassemblies, subcomponents, as well as raw material production like steel and aluminum. So while finished component manufacturing will be a leading job producer among the other activity areas, it is the broader distributed supply chain that has the greatest influence on job creation. In addition, these jobs will be concentrated in roughly the first 4 years prior to the commercial operations date of the project, which you can see in the graph in the bottom right, which shows these FTEs over time for the modeled project. You also have staging integration or staging assembly, which accounts for about 10% of total jobs. But again, notably, 44% of these are associated with specialized vessel operations. So rather than occurring at the staging or port facilities, many of these jobs will actually likely occur on board the vessels, assembling and installing the wind farms offshore. Development and soft costs, which is a lot of disjointed activities, account for about 11% of jobs in our analysis, and about 31% associated with onshore electric interconnection. So like landing the export cables, connecting them to the onshore substation, and 7% with site assessment activities, such as surveying, which we associate with those early planning and development phases. Lastly, operation maintenance actually ends up accounting for the second most number of jobs at an estimated 18%. And this is primarily because these jobs will exist throughout the operational life of the project. So it's not a lot of jobs annually. Over 35 years, it adds up. And the majority of these will take place at O&M facilities, though some are attributed to general administration, which is a bit more vague and harder to place those specific jobs. Here we can see those different expenditure areas across the modeled supply areas or activity areas. I won't spend too much time here, so if you'd like to dig deeper into these activities, the report does list these out along with estimated concentration of jobs associated with each and the number of jobs for our model project. Using this sensitivity analysis, we were able to develop 2 scenarios to assess the demand for professional labor across the floating offshore wind industry. The high investment scenario is based off projections in the AB 525 Workforce Readiness Plan, assumes significant domestic manufacturing of major components, and of course, it's going to result in a higher overall job estimates, but also 41% of those attributed to professional jobs. By using the findings in our NREL sensitivity analysis, we developed a low investment scenario, which assumes no manufacturing facilities will be apart from a foundation assembly. And then under this scenario, we found that 37% of jobs would require a university degree or higher. Using our some standard occupation codes, we were able to group these professional jobs and found that they were concentrated across architecture and engineering, accounting for roughly 50%, followed by management occupations and life and physical and social science occupations. In the table here, we can see the top 10 professional occupations for the floating offshore wind industry, estimated jobs for 2030 under the high investment scenario, as well as their experience and educational needs. And here, advanced degree is referring to graduate degrees or higher, and this is using data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We can also look at the concentration of these jobs under the 2 scenarios, engineering accounting for, again, for roughly 50%, 47 to 50, but with that distribution of the type of engineering jobs shifting depending on the level of local supply chain participation. So with more mechanical engineers being needed as you see an increase in supply chain participation or under that high investment scenario, and vice versa for civil engineering jobs, which end up making up a greater portion as those mechanical engineering jobs drop off and would be more closely associated with infrastructure development. We see similar patterns with the life and physical sciences, which make up a larger portion of professional jobs in the low investment scenario. And then for business and management occupations, we see a slightly lower number of jobs under the low investment scenario. And again, the detailed list of occupations, associated job numbers, and the scenarios can be found in the tables and appendices of the professional labor report. Moving on to port development jobs, we conducted a very similar analysis. Again, we used the AB 525 workforce readiness data, but this time we did not include a high or low level investment scenario. These jobs are associated specifically with the development and construction of port facilities and are generally similar to the professional occupations involved in constructing other large port infrastructure projects. What we found is that the majority of professional jobs, which account for about, I think it's about 15% of jobs, are primarily in management occupations, followed by business and financial occupations. And then rounding out the top three categories, again, we have engineering jobs making up roughly 17%. And then we can see those job categories broken down further, as well as the top 10 occupations listed on the right. Lastly, we did a preliminary assessment on the professional labor demand for the proposed offshore wind transmission infrastructure based on the two projects that are meant to connect the Humboldt wind energy area to the grid. And I'm just putting these projects here mainly for reference because for our analysis, we used input-output modeling to just better understand the composition of those jobs, at least for this study, rather than the number of jobs. So we used M-Plan and specifically an industry they categorize as construction of new power and communication structures. We found through this analysis that about 14% of the workforce would likely require a bachelor's degree or higher. And similarly to port infrastructure development, we're concentrated in management and business occupations, followed by architecture and engineering. We are currently, just to note, conducting a more comprehensive economic impact analysis for the two offshore wind transmission infrastructure projects, which will include job estimates both for construction and operation maintenance. So hopefully we'll have more about that in the near future. Lastly, we looked at how these professional labor needs aligned up with the academic programs at Cal Poly Humboldt, looking at current graduate rates and job estimates for floating offshore wind and port development through 2030. What we found is that Cal Poly is very well positioned to support this industry with programs aligned with nearly all professional roles in the floating offshore wind industry and port development. Particular strengths in engineering and the life and physical sciences, particularly given current programming, but also future investment in this area. And this includes the nearly finished new engineering and technology building. And while Cal Poly Humboldt lacks certain accreditation in its business programs, they still could also support a number of roles across both floating offshore wind and port development. We also found the graduate programs at Cal Poly Humboldt could provide further pathways in the industry, particularly for specialized roles in engineering and the life physical sciences, but also found that advanced degrees are, of course, going to increase the likelihood of qualification for certain roles, and seeing that across other trends on the East Coast. So based on our findings, we came up with some recommendations that first we be in further alignment between academic programs and curriculums with floating offshore wind. We're looking to strengthen industry partnerships to provide more hands-on learning opportunities and internships and improve workforce data transparency so that we can more accurately understand the demand for this and other labor forces. And as I mentioned, we are currently conducting an economic impact analysis for transmission infrastructure, so we'll have a better understanding of those job needs and roles. And the work from Xodus that they are doing with the county should provide more refined workforce projections that we noted here. And one of the three pillars for the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium is university level workforce development. So this is something that we will always be striving for and hope to expand opportunities for students to engage with this sector. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Andie Logan to talk about some of the work that he's been involved in. Thank you, guys.
Super. Okay, let me share my slides. Full screen on that one. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see those.
Looks good, Andie.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks to POWC for the invitation to present here today. I'm Andie Logan. I head up the Renewables Advisory Team in the US at Xodus. So I lead our local team here on primarily delivering a range of techno-economic market analysis and strategic advisory work in the offshore wind and renewable energy space. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from Northern California or even from the US. I guess I've been working in the US for the past 4 years or so, having previously been supporting the responsible development of the offshore wind sector in Scotland for the previous decade. Very briefly, just to explain who Xodus are. So Xodus are a global offshore energy consultancy providing technical, environmental, and engineering advisory support to a pretty wide range of clients in the energy and clean energy industries. In renewables, in offshore wind, that means we bring together all kinds of skills, interests, and expertise to deliver our engineering, scientific, and advisory work to government bodies, to R&D organizations, to economic development agencies, to project developers, supply chain, trade associations, all levels in the sector. Now, we've been doing that in offshore wind here in the US since 2019, but have been in offshore wind and the offshore energy sector for much longer in Europe, something of a little over 2 decades, where the European North Sea was really the epicenter for the growth of the global offshore wind industry, and provides plenty of lessons learned and best practice when it comes to developing offshore energy projects. So I guess the key reason why I was invited to speak to you today is that my team at Xodus has been working with Humboldt County to undertake a detailed workforce and supply chain assessment for the region. I don't represent the county, but as likely many of you on the webinar know, that Humboldt and the Redwoods is positioned to be a leading region in the US to host floating offshore wind at commercial scale in the future. But realizing that potential is going to require more than just developing the technology. It's going to need an engaged workforce, effective planning, and a robust local supply chain where we can develop it too. So over the past, say, year plus, our team has engaged the industry, partners, and the wider community across Humboldt and the Redwood Coast and the broader West Coast through interviews and surveys and community learning sessions. Those kind of conversations have helped us understand what local capabilities are present, who wants to be involved in the industry, and what work is going to be needed to set up the region for success. The work has been mapping the region's current supply chain and workforce capabilities, highlighting some existing gaps, and outlining a clear and actionable roadmap to ensure that Humboldt County is not just passively hosting offshore wind, but actively benefiting from it as well. So that work is due to be published soon. So I won't preempt any specific outcome from the study today. Perhaps if POWC will have me back in the future, then I'd be glad to present and discuss some of those at a slightly later date. But I guess the goals of the recommendations made from the study are to support Humboldt County as it navigates offshore wind opportunities and looks to localize economic benefits. They're to identify and help pursue areas in which the Redwood region is well positioned to lead on supply chain and workforce development for offshore wind, sort of capitalizing on the strengths and the interests of the region. And then to help establish forums for discussing larger issues around community concerns regarding environmental impacts, industrial development, misinformation, a whole wide range of important aspects. So I do want to be able to share with you some of our insights that shape the thinking about workforce development and the potential for job creation in the region, though. So let me start by maybe just following on a little bit just from Tan's work and looking at sort of where workforce opportunities come from. So I guess our work took a sort of starting point of considering what kind of work is contracted from the local supply chain in regions that haven't yet developed specialist manufacturing capability. There is a lot of work to be done where there's typically higher logic in procuring products and services locally wherever you can, either because those services aren't specific to the offshore wind industry, so projects can then more readily lean on adjacent industries that might exist locally, or because it's more cost effective to not have to bring in products and services from far afield if you're going to need them regularly in the future, such as during the sort of long 30-year operations period. We typically help to stand up a local capability to deliver what's needed. So yeah, I'm not representing any specific offshore wind project here, but from what we've seen in the past and in other regions, there are a range of products and services that can generally be more readily sourced from local suppliers with local employees, and those can be found across the offshore wind project life cycle. In California, we're still, really early in the development stage. So these aren't services and jobs being procured just yet. It gives us an idea of where the opportunities for local workforce are going to come from, the kinds of businesses and skills that we might look for first as project development progresses, and then to build upon as the future pipeline of projects emerges. I guess there are many ways to sort of estimate the future workforce demand off of what we might estimate to see in terms of capacity development in the future, and sort of quantify the jobs created from future investment. In our study, we've taken a scenario-based approach to considering different levels of offshore wind activity that could occur in the region, and assessed how many jobs have been needed to meet the demand for those products and services based on real-world examples. But equally valid is sort of estimating from a range of economic modeling as well, which helps us estimate how many jobs or full-time equivalents, as Tanner described, could be created where we're doing something new for the first time, such as in floating offshore wind. But no matter how anyone sort of calculates future job demand and requirements, the number of jobs created is going to be influenced by the type of work being performed, where some tasks are more labor intensive than others, and influenced as well by just how long some of that work is going to be performed for. So rather than forecast the sort of the future workforce demand scenarios for the region just yet, it can also be instructive to look at what's been seen elsewhere from the type of infrastructure that we might develop in Northern California. The industry is pretty well established in Europe, and that has seen and continues to see millions of dollars of investment in offshore wind infrastructure to support the delivery of a substantial pipeline of offshore wind projects in the European North Sea and now into other areas as well. I pulled out here as, I guess, a mixture of past and planned future investment in the kinds of things that are being proposed or considered for Northern California. Investments that have been made in ports to enable staging and integration, in manufacturing facilities, in operations and maintenance bases. And I guess what we can see is that the job creation opportunity can range from dozens of permanent jobs from, say, setting up a wind farm operations base, through to thousands of jobs from establishing significant manufacturing, staging, and construction work, with even higher sort of job numbers associated with the delivery of floating offshore wind projects. And these have been located in regions and communities that have a range of population sizes, population demographics. Some of those comparable with the Redwood Coast, others less so. And those can help us understand the kinds of impacts that communities can see from this type of investment. So we're going to be able to draw on this wealth of experience to understand the kinds of roles, kind of training, the wraparound services, the community infrastructure needed if we want to responsibly stand up an industry. And I guess that last slide kind of showed that job creation comes hand in hand with the specifics of the infrastructure being developed, but that the size of the impact for an opportunity is really going to depend on what it is that can be localized. As many people here will be aware, the Humboldt Bay Terminal is really considering all kinds of options for how it might be developed, aligned with some of that range of options shown on the last slide there. I guess as part of our work, we did collate some employment data for each major industry group in the Redwood Coast using some of the Bureau of Labor Stats census and employment data, and compared that with the roles typically seen in the development, in the manufacturing, the installation, the operations of an offshore wind project, with around sort of 10% of all of the employed individuals in the Redwood Coast performing job roles required by the offshore wind industry, which is, I guess, indicates a generally lower transferability of skill sets in the region in order to transition into offshore wind without some sort of support or enabling action. Naturally, the industries with the highest employment in the region have pretty low transferability to the offshore wind industry. Some of the office and administrative support, food prep, and healthcare support industries, reinforcing that the region is unlikely to have the capacity to support the development of an offshore wind industry without some thought and some care and some effort to either attract workers or increase training pathways or sort of career transition services. So the region will likely require some targeted investment in training and education, including partnerships with labor, with tribes, with local colleges to build a workforce pipeline that starts now and continues into the decades ahead. Finally for me, just wanted to summarize some of the overall workforce development challenges and opportunities that were identified for the region. What we've learned is, there's going to be jobs created and maintained in the region if offshore wind projects are delivered out of the Humboldt Bay offshore wind terminal. There's still investment to be made and infrastructure to be developed before we can say with confidence what the shape and scale of regional supply chain and workforce opportunity will look like. But it's incredibly difficult to deliver these offshore energy projects without having a nearby port and workforce associated workforce capability. The Harbour District is proactively working to best plan that infrastructure so that the offshore wind project developers can design their projects, and so that the county and the community can still can start to sort of plan how to develop the workforce in time. Second point here, I know, I guess Andie and Heidi after me are much better placed to cover than I am, but there's obviously a strong local commitment to workforce development in the Redwood region, with local governments recognizing offshore wind's potential economic benefits and multiple training and educational programs already in place, which can offer the baseline curricula in technical trades and environmental science. Those are really key programs and institutions that will need to be leveraged. And there's certainly a foundational existing workforce that can be leveraged too. Those working in construction, maritime services, and the professional, scientific, and technical service fields could be well placed to support the West Coast offshore wind industry in the future. And thought and care needs to go into how to scale those strengths strategically, alongside how the region fills gaps in other areas where there isn't such a readily available and transferable workforce. And then we've seen that regional investment in infrastructure to support offshore wind can create significant economic and community benefits. The region benefits from an engaged ecosystem of organizations that have committed to regional capacity building. We think those collaborative relationships offer the sort of strongest chance for success to establish not just a sustainable workforce pipeline, but the opportunity to deliver sort of broader community development initiatives too. We do need to be cognizant of some of the complexities and the challenges ahead so that we can devise plans to address gaps and mitigate risks. For example, the sort of relative geographic isolation. We heard the region being described as, well, yeah, like behind the redwood curtain, meaning that there's some distance to other major population centers. So there are barriers in terms of workforce mobility. The offshore wind jobs opportunity obviously isn't limited to Humboldt County, but I guess from the port of Humboldt Bay to sort of, yeah, no neighboring county in the region is less than an hour's commute away, which means some additional accessibility challenges for workers beyond Humboldt County. Yeah, for a lot of the work that could end up being centered around the Port of Humboldt Bay, much of that has typically been met on the East Coast by union labor, delivered under project labor agreements. So PLAs are likely to be signed for any significant infrastructure projects in the region. It's at the moment seems unlikely that there's enough union labor in the region to satisfy workforce demand, and there are a sort of limited number of union training programs capable of upskilling additional union workers. So that could increase the likelihood of unions needing to look beyond the region to fulfill PLA requirements and to train workers. So there could certainly be an opportunity to bring some of that training to the region in the future. And then critically, there's a strong need to recognize that the region has dealt with numerous boom and bust industrialization cycles in the past, causing local communities to be hesitant regarding proposed industrial development and projected benefits, especially when considering long-term impacts. So yeah, community trust and transparent communication are going to be essential. Offshore wind can only succeed here if it's shaped by and for the people in the region. So again, it's just approaching this opportunity to create and maintain jobs with thought and with care so that any local industry is something sustainable and ultimately positive. So I guess that's it from me at the moment. Like I said, I'll be happy to speak in more detail on some of the work we've produced in the future, where that report will naturally have more content than these slides do. But hopefully that's given some insight for now. And yeah, thanks again for the chance to speak today.
Thank you, Andie. I really appreciate it. I was having trouble finding the mute button there, or the get myself off mute. Um, that was wonderful. As Andie mentioned, that report will be released soon, hopefully. And big shout out to the Humboldt County Workforce Development Board for supporting that and all the work the county is doing to better understand some of these job implications. And thank you, Andie. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to our next presenter. Andie Jane, you're up.
All right. Thank you so much, Tanner. I am just really thrilled anytime I get a chance to talk about offshore wind or the MC3 program. I get really excited. Let me share my screen really quick. I'm going to start about talking about what is the MC3 program. Basically, let me get to the next slide here. What MC3 is, it's a collaboration between Cal Poly Humboldt and oh, something's in my way here. It's a collaboration between Cal Poly Humboldt and the Building and Construction Trades Council of Humboldt and Del Norte counties. So High Roads Construction Careers is a grant that comes from the state of California, and Cal Poly has built out a stakeholder of network of different contractors, local unions, community-based organizations. We work also with the College of the Redwoods, local tribes, and other advocates for policies that create apprenticeship opportunities for our program participants. And on upcoming infrastructure developments. Now, it's not only for offshore wind. There's plenty of big infrastructure projects coming to our community. A lot of building like Last Chance Grade and other big building projects happening here in our community. Our other big partner is the Humboldt Del Norte Building Trades Council. Now, its purpose is to oversee the Apprenticeship Readiness Program and forecast apprenticeship opportunities to ensure that the supply of participants matches the demand from contractors and their trade union partners. Now, this is really key because if we have way more graduates than they're able to handle apprentice, then that would not be a good thing, as well as not having enough. So that's a really important piece. Um, so MC3 stands for Multi-Craft Core Curriculum, and it introduces participants to a multiple construction trades and prepares them for entry into a registered apprenticeship program in the building and construction industry. So its main goals, it's designed to give participants a broad understanding of the building trades and what each craft does. It provides core skills necessary to succeed in a registered apprenticeship. It promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion in construction workforce. Um, so we aim to we really work to recruit women and BIPOC individuals, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Those are people that are really under representative in construction industry. So establishing, promoting diversity is really important. And also establishing a nationally consistent, high quality standard for pre-apprenticeship programs. Some of the topics we cover in the MC3 program typically include 120 hours of MC3 instruction. And that doesn't mean it is only 120 hours. With included in it is 40 hours of soft skills, as well as some additional credentials. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But the core modules include orientation to the apprenticeship, what registered apprenticeship is, how to apply, how to succeed, benefits of union apprenticeships, the construction industry and the trades, an overview of the building trade unions, introduction to different crafts, carpenters, electricians, ironworkers, laborers, etc. Opportunities and career paths. What are they? The different tools and materials and this is really a big piece, and it can be difficult for some of our participants. We do 40 hours of construction math. Hands-on practice with basic tools, we do that, measurement, fractions, and layout with math. The reason why we spend so much time on math is a couple of the trades are really heavy on math on their entry examination. So we try to make sure that they are absolutely ready to go out there and take a test. For example, the electrician union for the test to make it into the union is very heavy on math. So we want to make sure they are ready. Another component is safety and OSHA 10 certification. We do a lot of blueprint reading, basic symbols, scales, reading plans. We go over the heritage of the American worker, labor history, unions, workers' rights, as well as I mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of cultural awareness, and of course, teamwork. A new mandatory piece is green construction and sustainability, where we go over energy efficiency, renewable energy, and sustainable building. We also really go into financial literacy, managing income, credit, and budgeting. One population we get is people who have been justice involved, as well as those who are in recovery. And being able to manage income, credit, and your budget is really key, because labor unions pay really well comparatively, and so all of a sudden, you get people who have never made a lot of money before all of a sudden get starting to earn a lot and not really knowing how to understand how to budget money. And so we're trying to help them avoid getting into trouble with their money. So that's an important module, as well as employability and work readiness skills. And these can include communication, teamwork, time management, and adaptability. So what the MC3 program is not. It is not a replacement for a registered apprenticeship. It is a pre-apprenticeship, not an apprentice. It is an apprenticeship readiness program, not an apprenticeship itself. Participants do not earn trade hours, wages, or journey level credit for completion. It is only meant to prepare individuals for success in a registered apprenticeship, and it's not a substitute for one. Another thing is it is not a job guarantee. Completion of MC3 does not guarantee employment or automatic entry into an apprenticeship. However, um, we do have some direct entry agreements that do give some graduates preferred consideration or priority points when applying. So, for example, some unions do look at that MC3 certificate they get and do put them higher up in priority when hiring. Um, it is not a one-off class or a casual workforce program. It's structured credential national curriculum, and it has to be delivered under the North America NAB2 approval. And all of a sudden, I just forgot what NAB2 stood for. Um, but but anyway, that's NAB2 has special MC3 standards. It's not a general education or academic program, and it's not a short-term certification mill. It's comprehensive, and it emphasizes quality, rigor, and readiness. So, and it's not limited to any single population. So, again, it's built to expand access, including for women, people of color. We've had veterans, justice involved individuals, members of the LGBTQIA plus. We've had several transgender individuals. It's not owned by a single union. It's not a replacement for local partnerships. It's not static or outdated. It's continually being updated. And any program delivering MC3 must stay current with NAB2's latest version and use approved materials. The affiliated trades with the uh, Humboldt and Del Norte trades. We have 14 affiliated trades. They're the bricklayers, tile setters, and allied crafts local 3, like the International Association of Heat and Frost Insulators and Asbestos Workers local, the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the International Union of Elevator Constructors, local iron workers, the Labor's International Union of North America, the Operating Engineers, Local 3, the Operative Plasters and Cement Masons International Association, Local 300, Sheet Metal Workers, Local 104, the Teamsters, Local 137, United Association of Plumbers, Steam Fitters, HVAC, and Marine Fitters, Local 290, United Association of Sprinkler Fitters, Local 669, and United Association of Underground Utility and Landscape Irrigation, Local 355. And it's not uncommon to see representatives from the different unions come in and speak to our students. So during the MC3 classes, graduates earn the MC3 certificate itself, which NAB2 credentials that. And NAB2 does stand for the North America's Building Trade Unions. There we go. They get an OSHA 10 card, first aid, CPR, AED certification, GoPro Fundamentals in Building Green certification. They get the ATSSA flagging certification. Some of the cohorts have been able to get EPA lead renovation, repair, painting certification. Mental health first aid is something we've done recently, and many get access to direct entry agreements or priority consideration with local apprenticeship programs. So these are some of the things, some of the advantages of being a part of the Humboldt Apprenticeship Readiness Training. Some of the outcomes we have. So we've had 94 people enrolled so far. 81 is completed. So that's an 86 completion rate, with 68 men and a completion rate of 87%, and women consisted about 28% of the cohort. We're really pushing to get women in the trades, so that's why I pulled that one out. Some special groups I wanted just to showcase. Native Americans. We've had 11 enrolled, 8 complete. Black African Americans, 6 enrolled, 6 complete. Asian, 3 enrolled, 3 complete. Hispanic, Latino, 8 enrolled, 8 complete. And then women, 26 enrolled, 22 complete. And then 6 transgender and enrolled, and 4 of those have completed. And here next is some of the really important outcomes. We now have 14 participants are in registered apprenticeships. 2 of those are now on top of the 14. 2 are have now journeyed out and are journeymans. We have 7 who have recently passed labor union assessments, and 1 of those is currently working as an apprentice. We have 7 working in non-union construction jobs, and 10 are employed in non-construction fields. So we're feeling pretty pleased about that. Now let's talk about my segment in offshore wind. I really like to get people excited about offshore wind, but it's a one day. I just talk one day about it. I go over the key features of offshore wind, like what are the benefits? It's sustainability, job creation, it's energy security. I also talk about the challenges, the costs, logistical issues, any type of regulatory hurdles, and the role of offshore wind within the global energy transition that we have. Clean, renewable energy generation, high energy yield and capacity, energy security and diversification, economic growth, and job creation, as well as driving technological innovation, aligning with climate goals, and enhancing grid stability and flexibility, and environmental and ecological opportunities. And plus, there's always, we talk about the need for electricity with more electric vehicles on the road, all electric buildings. The big thing, data centers and AI, along with cryptocurrency and data mining, urban growth, smart homes, the clean energy shift. So these are things we talk about. We also delve into specific. We travel the world and look at fixed offshore wind projects that are out there, as well as floating offshore wind projects, and then we spend time looking at other types of clean energy like solar, geothermal, and hydropower. People get really, really, really excited about offshore wind. And then finally, how do you sign up? In order to be a participant, you must be 18 years of age, have a high school diploma or an equivalent, have a valid California driver's license, or just have a valid driver's license, be able to pass a drug test, be interested in the trades. We're averaging about 60 applicants vying for 20 seats each time we do a cohort. We have a cohort starting on December 8th, and we had 59 applicants, and right now we've got 24 people we're seating. We'll see if we get all 24 make it on the first day, but that's where we're at. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy Jane. Appreciate it. That was inspiring to see some of the work that we're doing here at the university through university advancement. With that, I'm going to pass it on to our final presenter, Heidi Moore-Guynup. And I will be sharing your slides, so just give me one moment.
Good afternoon, everybody. The weather up here is starting to shift. You can see the clouds are rolling in and the moisture is definitely palpable. Wonderful. So keeping it local as well, there's going to be some overlap between what Andy Jane just shared and some of the work, the good trouble that some tribal nations here on the North Coast are getting into. So what I'm here to present about today is our successful first cohort completing a tribally co-designed low voltage pre-apprenticeship program. And this program occurred over the course of this current summer. So I'm Heidi Moore-Guynup. I'm the Director of Tribal and Government Affairs, as well as oversee the Sustainability Department at Blue Lake Rancheria. And at the bottom of this page, you will see 4 distinct logos. The first, starting from the left, is the Blue Lake Rancheria. The second is the Hoopa Valley Tribe. The third is the Karuk tribe, and the last there is the Yurok tribe. The significance of this is that these 4 tribes came together to tribally co-design this low voltage pre-apprenticeship program with the intent of providing tribal members from these rural regions with the opportunity to take a peek into what a career being a low voltage electrician might look like. Next. All right, so to give a little bit of context of where I'm coming from, we are located in rural Northern California, about 17 miles east or inland from the coast. The Blue Lake Rancheria is well known as a clean energy innovator and a leader. They were able, along with the Schatz Energy Research Center and generous support from the California Energy Commission, to commission a first of its kind behind the meter microgrid. And people come from all over the world to look at the work that we deploy here. The microgrid provides resilient energy resources when the access to the grid is compromised. And for that work, they earned the distinction of being the 2016 Obama Clean Energy Champion. So work that is really inspiring to be a part of. Okay, so you might be asking, why did we specifically choose low voltage electrician as our areas of foci? Well, because the skilled trades, especially low voltage electrical work, often have high barriers to entry for women, tribal members, and other historically excluded groups. And so when that access is compromised or denied, that means that individuals from these historically excluded groups get locked out of economic upward advancement it, and they miss out on the rich perspectives and innovation that these communities can bring. And at the same time, we are seeing that the electrical field is rapidly growing, especially here on the north coast of California, and that we see that there's a rising demand for trained workers, both in the residential as well as an array of commercial implications. And so we built this program to bridge that gap, to connect tribal members and others to registered apprenticeships and careers in high demand, high skill industry, with the hope of creating livable wage jobs. Okay, this is a diagram that I designed a couple of years when we were just conceptualizing this project. But what I want to kind of show is that there's this potential on-ramp with low voltage electricians to supporting the emerging offshore wind industry, to supporting O&M with microgrids, public utilities. We have broadband, some of the fastest in the world, coming up onto our coast from Singapore. And so if you look at these industries by logo, and then you look at the data that I have here, there are all sorts of workforce occupations associated with those industries. And in each of them, we see that low voltage electricians presents itself in a pretty significant manner. All right. So I'm not going to be duplicative. We've talked about offshore wind. I assume that people are familiar with offshore wind on the call. But we really see it as kind of a comprehensive ecosystem, right? We're not just talking about the turbines in the water. We're not just talking about the heavy lift terminal that is proposed on the shores of the Humboldt Bay. And we're not just talking about transmission. And then you can sprinkle supply chain and O&M and all other factors in to make the offshore wind industry itself. Next. But also, low voltage electricians can support implementation and O&M of broadband. We know that there's been an significant investment in solar in California and in the North Coast. And so we need installers, and we need folks to be able to provide operations and management. There is a growing rise of interest in microgrid development and deployment. For example, Blue Lake Rancheria, as many people know, has a comprehensive microgrid here. We are known as a safe haven in times of regional disaster. People come here to access fuel, warmth, food. They come stay in our hotels for life-saving medical devices, such as home dialysis machines. And we also were thought partners along with Schatz and the Redwood Coast Energy Authority on the microgrid that is located at the Eureka Arcata Airport. And all of that then is going to inform a much larger project that is called the TERRAs for Tribal Energy Resilience and Sustainability. And that project is going to be modeled here at Blue Lake Rancheria, where essentially we take 4 individual microgrids and we tie them together, or we nest them together or network them together. We're going to have to figure out what the term is that we're going to land on here. But essentially, if you think of a Ukrainian nesting doll, you take 3 of them and you land them basically inside of this larger microgrid and connect the controller. So it gives you the max flexibility of how and when to send your electrification across, in our case, the campus. But the real reason why we're building that out is not only to innovate, perhaps the first in the world, this kind of infrastructure, but then to inform what would happen on a 140-mile distribution circuit that is known as the HOOPA 1101, which is one of the top worst performing grid distribution lines in California. And it disproportionately impacts our tribal neighbors to the east and north of us. And so once we prove up the technology here at Blue Lake Rancheria, it will be scaled in a much larger fashion across the HOOPA 1101 distribution line, hopefully leading to improved outcomes and lives along that corridor. It also can be used, the career can be supportive in supporting residential applications. And just for a moment, if you look to the picture on your left, that is actually a picture of one of our pre-apprenticeship students this summer. They were constructing pony walls, and then they worked to pull the wires through and secure outlets. But also there's commercial applications, right? But some people actually signed up for our program because they wanted to save money and they wanted to be empowered by learning skills so that in their own homes they could change out a ceiling fan or switch out a light switch. And so that was kind of on our post-survey results. It was really nice to see how much people appreciated feeling confident about doing some light electrical work on their own properties. All right, so similar to Andie Jane, wanting to celebrate achievements, the program itself was a 4-week, 48-hour hybrid course. It was taught by a whole host of experts in the field. It was greatly supported by my colleague Isabel Erad, who I believe is a participant on this call today. So essentially what happened was that over a course of a year, a representative from each of the tribal nation and I worked to really understand what the keys to success with other registered apprenticeship programs were across the country, especially those that were situated in Indian country and being run by Indigenous people themselves. So it was greatly influenced by what was happening with the Meskwaki tribe. And we actually hired one of their instructors to lead some of our programming, as well as other tribes such as the Yakima tribe. And then other organizations such as Grid Alternatives and others. So we spent a full year cultivating and vetting what we thought would be the best course of modules, and wanting to make sure that we built in culturally responsive programming to the modules. So how it then transpired was that it was a 4-week, 48-hour hybrid course, which meant that on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for the course that time, participants would Zoom in and receive their live instruction from a live instructor, but in the comforts of their own home. And then it culminated with a comprehensive 3-day in-person hands-on session that was also taught by local tradesmen. And then those that completed were awarded a $5,000 completer stipend. They'll be given a comprehensive set of tools. So what we had 62 applicants in 48 hours of going live, which was great, but we only had 25 slots. And so we created a way to kind of vet the applicants, and we selected 25, and of those 25, it ranged in age from 18 to 52, so a really nice distribution of age. We had a 100% completion rate, with almost half being female, which was really exciting because we too were trying to uplift folks that historically haven't been represented in that career field. And we had tribal members from the Yurok tribe, Karuk, Hupa, and Big Lagoon tribes participate, and all but one had tribal affiliation. So the topic areas, this isn't a comprehensive, it's just some of the highlights, but students were introduced to construction math and measurement, to electrical drawings, working with and for tribes, understanding tribal sovereignty, understanding that there's our tribal employment right offices and officers, and that we introduced them to their tarots and have cultivated ongoing relationships between the participants and their tarots. We introduced soft skills. with our hands-on. We did power tools. You can see, again, that's a real life picture of some of the work that they did that weekend. So they constructed basically like a shelf or a storage shed using the power tools. They too completed the OSHA 10 and received that certification. They participated in first aid CPR and then had resume and job search support. Also an introduction to unions. We partnered with IBEW to provide some support and potential future access to their apprenticeship program as well. All right, so I want to acknowledge the James Irvine Foundation because they were the ones that recognized with the emerging offshore wind industry that we needed to mobilize and grow our own, if you will. And so they provided generous funding that not only supported the curriculum development and design, but gave stipends to those that helped inform the program. They provided the stipends for the students' hotel rooms. We really tried to eliminate all barriers. We had childcare offered, food, and mileage reimbursement. But most importantly, I want to really acknowledge the 4 tribes, specifically Hupa, Yurok, and Karuk, for coming to the table each week and being leaders with Blue Lake Rancheria in taking this on for themselves and for the young people and middle-aged and older people within their communities. The co-design made all the difference. It ensured that our training was culturally relevant and trauma-informed and included wraparound support that is often missing in traditional trade programs. So, next steps. Well, we're super proud of our cohort and we're already underway planning to offer the program again in 2026 pending funding. And as of 10 o'clock this morning, I can tell you that the James Irvine Foundation has given us a second tranche of funding to be able to help support the next cohort. So thank you to James Irvine. And I'm gonna provide access to Isabel Erad's email if folks are interested in learning more about our program and wanna speak with someone directly, or you are more than welcome to visit the link that Maya just put into the chat, which will take you directly to our website. And with that, we designed it to be tribally co-designed, a paid supporter program that actively breaks barriers and creates career pathways in an essential and fast-growing field. And we're just so appreciative to the tribes of partners and most of all the participants for making the program such a powerful success. And hopefully this is a hyperlink and will take us to a brief video. And Tanner, we don't have to watch it all, but maybe a couple minutes.
Have you seen the video?
Yeah, I'm not hearing it. Huh. It's okay. It has catchy music, but you can just look at it for a minute. It'll just go through a series of short vignettes that show you what we were doing.
We'll make sure to share this in the chat as well.
Yeah, so you can see lots of hands-on. Really great ratio of women to men. Okay, that gives you the gist. Thank you for that. We can go to the next slide at your convenience. All right, so now I want to kind of transition to something that's new and exciting. We have more than broken ground on the Ta'm Resilience Campus, which is a 16,000 square foot campus comprised of 2 buildings. We just finished the first, the smaller one, that's approximately 6,000 square feet. And our Workforce Development and Training Center is a strategic investment for economic development. Specific goals that we have are to continue to increase access to quality careers and infrastructure and green climate careers for local community members. We want to continue to build the internal organizational capacity of Blue Lake Rancheria as a regional economic and workforce development leader. And we also want to expand collaboration and partnership with regional tribes, educational institutions such as Cal Poly Humboldt and College of the Redwoods, workforce and economic development organizations. We are hoping that through this workforce development and training center that we will be able to create some guaranteed tribal revenue, including wood innovations, microgrid deployment, and restoration and sea level rise mitigation work. And I want to acknowledge that David Narum is really one of the master minds of getting this project off the ground and getting it funded. I just have the opportunity to share it with you today. Next. All right, so we feel that the Resilience Campus represents a transformative opportunity for economic development and resilience building within the tribe and across the region. Some of our programmatic areas of foci will be entrepreneurship and innovation, workforce development, industry clusters and value chains, and private-public partnerships. And this picture on the bottom is a rendering that would show kind of the breezeway, if you will, in between both of the buildings. Next. All right, so some of the areas that we're already very involved in are disaster preparedness, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, smart technology, and sustainable food production. And with these areas, there are a diverse range of existing, new, and to be developed enterprises poised to build regional resilience and prosperity. And then I just have a little bit of information there that talks about our funding stack, which I'm not going to get into the specifics, but just suffice to say that to fund a project as ambitious as this, it has taken a weaved approach, if you will, between various funding entities, as well as looking at our U.S. House of Representative Jared Huffman for funds that were discretionary that he also applied to supporting this project. So we want to thank all of the funders for their generous support. And with that, I conclude my presentation. So just thank you for giving me and Blue Lake Rancheria an opportunity to talk about just a thumbnail sketch of what we have going on here in rural Northern California.
Thanks, Heidi. That was always awesome to learn more about. And I'm kind of jealous of those people who got to go through that program. I just did some electrical work in my own house that I feel less than super confident about. So a little jealous. I'm going to jump us over into our Q&A and just give me a moment while I pull up those questions. Between the screens. To start, and this is a question I saw before I started sharing my screen, but if we could talk a little bit about, some of the data gaps that we're seeing. And Andie, I'll start this one at you, really about what are the gaps in the data information that you're seeing when you're developing these sorts of workforce analyses or assessments. And Andie, Logan, to be clear.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple from sort of two sides of from both sides of the analysis. Certainly one, and like the key one is the if anyone has a crystal ball to tell us exactly what the workforce demand future is going to be like, then I'd love to have a conversation with them, because we're still sort of working through what the specific infrastructure and the use might be like in the region. So that means that our envelope for performing this type of analysis is generally pretty broad, necessarily so as we look to make sure that we're planning for all kinds of realistic and achievable future scenarios as well. So yeah, at some point in the future, we'll know more about what the like in infrastructure investment will be and what it will achieve, and it'll be, we're sort of better positioned to react and sort of stand up our sort of workforce and training development programs in order to meet some of those needs. In terms of sort of data from like demographics in the county, it's always the census data is always invaluable for sort of helping us do really sort of broad stroke like analysis of what sort of workforce and community demographics look like, but we're always looking for sort of the real world experience of hey, is this actually representative of the communities that we have at hand as well? So any type of like analysis or assessment that tries to match up a sort of workforce supply and demand side, it really needs to make sure it's engaging with local communities and sort of showing the results of analysis so that we can get that feedback and say, actually, our workforce and communities look a little bit different, and they've had specific experiences in sort of transitioning into different workforce roles in the past, and we need to be sort of cognizant and learning from all of that as well. So there's better information sort of needed on all sides of the equation for future planning, and I think that will be sort of a key point for continuing this type of work as we look to sort of marry up the sort of supply versus demand analysis in the future to make sure that we are designing and delivering the right workforce development programs.
Thanks, Andie. I appreciate that. And Heidi or Andie Jane, on your side of implementing a program and using this information or data from analyses like these, what do you see as the needs there or gaps there?
Yeah, for us, looking at this coalition of the 4 tribes, there just really wasn't a clear pathway for tribal members to access apprenticeship programs and to even be aware of what those opportunities might be. And so we used the data, which showed that tribal members are very underrepresented in the electrical field and in the unions, and that women, females were also very underrepresented. So we use that data to leverage a compelling narrative to the future funder to change the narrative. So sometimes using the data gaps as a way to kind of illustrate a problem. And if you can do that in a compelling way, and then you can do it in a culturally responsive way. Because the other thing we don't want to do is we don't want to have folks be excited about going into a profession or industry that potentially could perpetuate harms. And so one of our other goals is that the Working For and With Tribes section, which also has components of missing, murdered Indigenous people, among other things, that prospective employers would also participate in those modules before we would eagerly hand over a completer of our pre-apprenticeship program to them.
Thanks, Heidi.
So this data is also helpful for us, at least me, in helping the student make a decision on which direction to go. On say which career, whether or not to be a laborer versus an elevator operator. I mean, there's it could be a big difference, like because offshore wind has opened up, could have opened up a lot more opportunities to actually repair elevators that may not have you may not think about here in Humboldt County, really needing a lot of people to repair elevators. But when you think offshore wind, that opportunity opens up. So it just gives us more opportunity to work with giving them direction. Okay, I'm sorry I'm stumbling over words, but that's what
I think to add to that, Andie Jane, Some of us had the opportunity to attend the Oceanic Conference in New Orleans before all of the executive order chaos happened. And they had football-sized stadiums, plural, filled with supply chain. And it was unbelievable, like almost unfathomable, the various opportunities that potentially could exist, either in manufacturing, safety, elevator, cabling, underwater, unmanned sea crafts. And the list just goes on and on and on. So I would recommend to folks, if you have the opportunity in the future, I don't know if the next couple of years is the best time to attend. It was significantly scaled back this year. But when the offshore wind industry picks up some steam, I would recommend going to one of those big conventions and stepping outside of the workshops for a minute and going to look at the potential for supply chain, because it was mind-blowing.
That kind of leads us into our next question. And given that the majority of jobs are in the supply chain, Andie, based on some of your all's research, I know you can't give us too many specifics, but I know it included also somewhat of a supply chain analysis. Kind of what opportunities exist in Humboldt in regards to the supply chain that you all noticed. Be curious to hear a little bit about that.
I don't have the we have done the I guess that sort of supply chain analysis, looking at both the I guess opportunity to attract sort of new manufacturing to the region, or new supply chain to the region, as well as looking at what kind of lower tier 2, tier 3 supply chain exists. So there is some construction capability, obviously some of the professional and scientific trades, some of the local environmental assessment, environmental survey and planning pieces. So there's almost a inherent opportunity for when offshore wind projects can be developed on the West Coast, to use sort of make sure we're utilizing the local construction services for anything on the onshore aspects of things. So typically there's a sort of strong adjacency with the onshore construction and building trades services there that we're able to leverage. There probably likely will be some more minor manufacturing opportunities for those for some more generic manufacturing components. I sort of listed some on one of the slides earlier on, and that'll be sort of detailed and much more in the report to come as well. But really, we're also excited just around the opportunities in operations and maintenance, where we have strong logic for sort of standing up local supply, because the cost and challenge associated with mobilizing that kind of supply chain and workforce for regularly for maintaining these projects, it gets pretty expensive. So seeing some of the inspection, maintenance, and repair capability in the region that will have to undertake some investments, some upskilling, maybe some retooling, certainly some offshoring of some of those services. But those are sort of really long-term opportunities as well, and the more turbines that are installed offshore, then the sort of greater the operations and maintenance opportunity will be as well. So something we're excited to show off once the report gets published. But apologies, I can't show some of the killer figures we have describing some of that just now. But
that's all right. Thanks, Andie. Sorry for putting you on the spot there. And back to Andie, Jane, and Heidi. Understanding that a lot of the communities that you're targeting with your training programs are underserved, disadvantaged, and historically, neglected. And so it's awesome, that you're able to make this program available to them. But what kind of additional services are you seeing that are necessary to support those participants, like wraparound services?
So one participant, a single parent, and didn't have his vehicle registered. So was very concerned about making it over to the coast legally for the training program. And so we were able to give him a small advancement of his stipend. He'd been a stellar student, with the promise that it was going to be exclusively used to get his vehicle registered. So now when he drives his child or his two children around, they're driving in a legal manner. And so sometimes it's really leaning into the individual stories of the barriers and then working collaboratively, but with high expectations. Had to show me the registration documents once within 48 hours of cutting the check, those types of things. So, I mean, I think it's nuanced. We knew that mileage, childcare, food, housing for the in-person, and their time, all were important to be valued. And so, and also knowing that we wanted to make sure they had long-term support, which is why we introduced them to their tribal employment rights officers. And in some cases, they have tribal education departments as well, so that people within their explicit community who they more than likely have increased trust with would be the ones that would really provide ongoing and reliable support moving forward.
To add on to Heidi, some of the supports that are definitely needed. We've had some single women or mothers who have wanted to be in the MC3 program, but have not been able to because they were not able to get care for their children. And so childcare is a big barrier. We've had also people who have completed the program who are not able to find childcare and then be able to find work, right? So that childcare is one of the biggest barriers that I see. Other barriers are being able to maintain their vehicle. If you get into the construction trade, you are going to have a vehicle to be able to get to various places because the bus is not really a good form of transportation to get to a job site at 6:30 in the morning, like out in the middle of nowhere, right? So there's all kinds of barriers that need to be addressed. Our MC3 program runs Monday through Friday, and it's for 5 weeks. And they have to be there they have to make the hours or they don't graduate. And so they can be really tough, especially if their car breaks down or the child gets sick and they have to pick them up from school and they miss hours that way. So being able to work with them when they have doctor's appointments, dental appointments, things like that. So when they come to the MC3 program, there's a lot of things that they have to put on hold. And so there's a lot of hand holding that I have to do as well to make sure that they're able to complete. It's not as easy as possible, especially if you're someone who has just come out of recovery within the last, say, month or so, and you're trying to make a go of it. So yeah, we have our range of participants vary widely. We have students who just graduated high school to 55-year-old people who have been in the job market for many years and have worked successfully, but are changing jobs for whatever reason. And so, yeah, it can be challenging for anyone, but yeah, that's my take.
Thanks, Andy.
I
And
think
actually,
also, Tanner, if I can add, I think, building cohort was a really important aspect. So each of the tribal nations, with the exception of Big Lagoon, which is a very small tribal nation, there were at least 5 to 6 tribal members from each community. And being able to help facilitate relationship building between them. We saw carpooling, we saw an auntie provide childcare for not only her sister's child, but one of the other participants' children. So we're building agency, and we're also helping them to build and find their community.
Thanks, Heidi. And this question, I think, speaks to that same idea of building those cohorts. What do you see as next steps for syncing up and advancing strategies for multi-benefit workforce development? What inputs and capacity building needs need to happen to get the Redwood region in a place where we can act on and implement those next steps? And this one can go to anyone. I personally would say meetings like this, gatherings like this, understanding that so many people in our communities are doing good work that has a lot of overlap, and all of it, I think, is in preparation for the next thing to come. And whether that's offshore wind industry is what we're here speaking about today, I think as a community that's experienced a lot of boom and bust, we recognize the need to come together.
Progress.
Okay. Andie, Logan, you got your mic off if you have anything to say, or
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's sort of echoing. I guess, yeah, from the work that we carried out, we did some pretty extensive sort of ecosystem mapping, and there is such a really wide range of really like engaged parties and who are have the potential to influence or be impacted by offshore wind development in the region. So. Yeah, I think we've made some recommendations as a result of the work that we've done, and I think there's certainly a strong opportunity to benefit from having a dedicated offshore wind coordinator to ensure that sort of continued leadership and the coordination and some sort of regional offshore wind task force that's able to make sure it's engaging with the all of the great views, perspectives, inputs from across the region and probably beyond as well, where there's a lot of efforts on the I guess on the West Coast in our in neighboring states who are also looking to support the development of this industry as well. So yeah, I think there's likely need for like a role or a group to sort of take some leading actions in making sure that we are that all of the communities are aligned on what is what can happen, what is happening, and ensuring sort of all voices are being heard as well. So I think that's something we certainly saw from the some of the aspects of the work that we did as well.
thanks, Andie.
I think, Tanner, from my perspective too, that there are some groups in our region that are working to advance workforce development in general, such as the Redwood Region RISE. But what we noticed at the most recent convening was that there really weren't many young people who were engaged and potentially aware of what RISE is up to. Meaning that we have a whole cohort of individuals who aren't necessarily aware of what the emerging workforce development opportunities are. And so I think we need to do a better job of connecting our TK-12 and our community college students, maybe even our college students at Cal Poly Humboldt, with what's happening within the county. And so I don't know if that is centered by the county workforce development board or team, but I do think that there's opportunity to improve these cross-sector collaborations.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it. Andie Jane, we do have a question specifically for you. As we all know, Humboldt County has significant limitations in the availability of pregnancy-related services, as well as for healthcare more broadly. Recognizing that this can have a major impact on recruitment for positions in Humboldt County, are the campus and the county considering pregnancy and broader healthcare development as part of their offshore wind planning program?
Um,
And I know that's a big one, but
yeah, I can't answer that question, to be perfectly honest with you. Not I know that Cal Poly Humboldt is working on definitely on healthcare. And that is definitely on improving healthcare access in the region here in Humboldt Del Norte. But the connection to offshore wind, I cannot answer that question. I apologize.
that's okay. I guess this one kind of relates, and that is that, while jobs offer a lot of economic benefit to the area, um, if either of you, Andie, Jane, or Heidi, could speak at all about maybe what some of the concerns might be about a influx of new workers, and how do we ensure that these jobs remain local?
So we do know that there's going to be we're going to need if as the increased workers come to Humboldt for offshore wind, there's going to be a need for more dentists, more doctors, more teachers, more grocery stores, right? That's just a given. And so uh, we do need to recruit more doctors and dentists, right? So um, I so what was that question? Please give me that question again. You're not really in my wheelhouse right now.
That's okay. I think the end of the question might be, though, and that is how do we ensure these jobs remain local, and available to local people?
Well, we have to build our workforce from within,
Yeah,
right? Recruit from within as much as possible. We start young. Offshore wind is still, 15, 20 years from now, right? Port development, I know is going to start fairly soon, but we build our workforce from within with programs like MC3 and like what's going on at the Rancheria, right? We build our workforce from within, build it up, and train them. So when the time comes, we have a workforce that's here in Humboldt County or Del Norte County that is ready to work. I mean, that's how we do that.
And I'd like to add, similar to us picking low voltage electrician, because there's multiple on-ramps, right? We don't want to train up our next generation of people now for a job that's not going to exist for 15 years. But there are ways that those positions can be flexible and nimble over time. I would also like to say that although we have a real desire to build up our own and grow our own, and we will do that, that inevitably, when we look at some of the statistics that Andie showed at the top of our session, the need for workers is probably going to be beyond what we're able to provide. And so we also need to make sure that there are comprehensive protections in place to make sure that we are not perpetuating an already disastrous missing murdered Indigenous peoples epidemic, that we're not promoting sexualized violence, and that we have rules and expectations and policies and procedures and reporting portals that actually lead to action. So I think it's both. It's a growing our own to the extent that we can, and then making sure that the developers adopt really rigorous safety protocols to ensure that we don't perpetuate existing harms.
thanks, Heidi and Andie. I appreciate it. We're getting close to wrapping up, but while we're on the subject of timing, which is a big one and something I don't think we touched on quite enough in this session, and that's how are we balancing the timing of these projects and training programs, and how do we ensure that the people who are going through these programs are able to obtain jobs at the end of them, even though we're not quite there with these offshore wind projects.
I mean, not to be redundant, I think our strategy was to pick up a job that has multiple near-term and long-term pathways. And then working with the unions for registered apprenticeship programs, working with local employers, working with tribal nations that want to hire their own and support their own, and working with the state. Right now, tribes aren't really interested in giving up their tribal sovereignty by sending individuals, tribal members, to state facilitated apprenticeship programs, because when there is a dispute, it has to be arbitrated in California's courts, and the tribes would rather it be arbitrated in tribal courts. And so we're not necessarily at an impasse. I was able to meet with the Department of Labor when they were here several weeks ago to highlight that as an issue. And he said, quite frankly, he'd never realized that that was an issue. So there may be a path forward so that a tribe could actually register their own apprenticeship program.
Yeah, maybe just I'll add to that. I think coordinating infrastructure timelines with the training pipelines, really key. I think Heidi put it really well that there's no value in training someone for a job which doesn't exist yet. It's a waste of their time, a waste of resources. I guess let's say we are blessed with the gift of time at the moment. These projects aren't going to be appearing overnight. That they we are still years away from I guess seeing any sort of development of offshore wind off of the west coast. So it gives us time to get things right. And the challenge is going to be sort of balancing the sort of the interest and enthusiasm for contributing towards what the sort of very right solution for the region looks like, and making sure that all of the invested parties are able to give input and sort of shape what the right answer is for the region at the right time, without feeling like it's perpetually on the horizon and a decade away. So that'll take some clear communication and information being provided as to the sort of value for those to contribute at the right time to help shape the positive outcomes. But we do have time right now to ensure that the any workforce development programs initiatives are being really well thought through, so that we're actually in a really strong position when the time comes to initiate any of those programs.
So we don't train people unless we know there's a good chance that they could get hired or picked up by a union. So that's the job of the Building Trades Council. They gauge how many apprenticeships they're picking up during the year. So one of the things, like we have one apprentice that is currently working on the Indianola overpass. We've got an electrician who's working on the Cal Poly big engineering building that's going up. We've had several laborers been working on out in the Arcata Bottoms, the big solar panel project. So, and other laborers have been doing road projects. We've got one electrician working for PG&E. So that's kind of the idea is they get jobs now to be ready for when the offshore wind project does come, there's gonna need to be a big need for laborers when they start working on the harbor, cleaning it up, and remediating all the mess that's over there on the peninsula, and even before they start building it up. And so we understand that they're going to need these workers are going to need to get some time under their belt as apprentices before offshore wind comes. So that's our game plan.
Thanks, Andy. And yeah, I guess just quickly from my own perspective, part of when I'm doing my work, understanding that the timing is constantly shifting and the projects and the details and the information. So trying to be as transparent with the analysis as I do so that others can replicate it in the future is certainly a goal in all of my work. All right, we're going to end it with one last question, and that is that many of us are aware that the California Energy Commission is hosting an AB3 scoping meeting this Thursday and Friday, and just wanted to check in with all of you and see if there's anything you hope to see uplifted in that discussion. And for those who aren't aware, that AB3 workshop is around the CEC's Seaport Readiness Plan. And it's okay if you
Yeah.
don't.
I just would like to say, as many know, Blue Lake Rancheria and EJ groups such as Core Hub and Epic, folks around the peninsula and Samoa are really trying to push for green port implementation, and not just minimum viable, but significant, something that could shape how port development happens across the globe in the future. And although the Harbor District has adopted a resolution to develop a strategic plan around green port strategies, we want to make sure that the regulatory bodies where they have influence are creating similar expectations. We want offshore wind industry to be done in an ethically community-informed way, and would really appreciate the support of CEC in creating those shared expectations.
Thanks, Heidi. And if no one has anything else, I just want to give one last huge thank you to our presenters, Andie Jane, Andie, Logan, and Heidi. Thank you for being here and speaking about the awesome work you're doing. We appreciate you all. And thank you to everybody in attendance. As a reminder, this will be recorded and we will be making the slides available for Heidi's and Andie Jane's presentations. However, not for Andie Logan's. Just keep an eye out for the county's published report that, again, should be coming relatively soon. And we're all looking forward to it. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.